Innersloth, Heart Machine, Megacrit, Mossmouth. Besides all sounding like early 2000s punk garage bands, what do these all have in common? Well, they're all indie game studios. And if you're interested in game development or even just gaming in general, at some point it's probably crossed your mind about starting your own indie game studio. But how do you actually create a game studio? Well, in this video, I'm gonna walk through like the actual tangible steps of what I would do if I was gonna create an indie game studio like right now. Also, I'm going to assume that you've either released a game, you're working on a game, or you're at least planning a game, because that's kind of the main thing you sort of need for a game studio. Now, I've actually registered a company in the US before, and at my current company, I work with a lot of game studios across the world, so I do have a little bit of experience in this, but by no means am I like a business, legal, or financial expert in any capacity. So this goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it. This isn't financial or legal advice. This is just kind of the process I would go through. Now, obviously first is the name, right? We need something to call our game studio. It seems like a lot of game studios these days use the suffix games, productions, studios, you know, like Red Fox Games or Giga Sword Productions or something. And if you're really struggling, you can use a game studio name generator. Personally, I don't really like the suffixes. I just like kind of the one word, two-word phrase type of names. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to start a fictional game studio called Big Mana. Also, you may want to use like a social media name checker just to check if there's already a big game studio or a content creator using the name that you're thinking about. So second step, do you actually need like a legal business entity to have a game studio? Now again, I'm not a financial advisor or a lawyer, so don't trust anything I say, but at least from my knowledge in the United States, you technically don't. You can be what's called a sole proprietor or in a sole proprietorship. So using this, you would file taxes normally as you would just like general income taxes. And everything is just filed under your name. So in the US, to be at least a single member game studio, not much is actually needed in terms of, you know, setting up a business entity. Now, the next most popular option that I actually did was setting up a limited liability company, also called an LLC. I have since dissolved it, but when I was living in Seattle, I did have an LLC called Rainy Sunday, and it was actually a registered company in the state of Washington. And so I paid taxes exactly the same as I would have as a sole proprietorship, but it gives you sort of a liability coverage, hence the name, if you run into kind of like legal issues. Let's say, for example, you were sued for copyright infringement. So if you were just in a sole proprietorship, you could have your personal assets be liable to cover that, you know, lawsuit. But if you had an LLC, then only the company's assets could be at risk. Now, obviously it varies based on the case, but that's generally the benefit of having an LLC, is that you kind of have what's called a corporate veil, which is able to protect your personal assets, stuff you didn't make through the company versus what you actually did make through the company. Now, if you intend to have full-time employees, that's when the whole like legal business thing starts to get a little bit more complex, and I don't have a ton of experience in that because I was just a single member LLC, so it was very simple for me to do. So if you're thinking about eventually hiring employees, you're going to want to look into the different types of structures and the different benefits that actually come along with how you structure your company. And obviously this varies a lot based on the country and even the state that you're in. So for example, I live in New York, so there's specific New York laws that you have to abide by when establishing a company, just like I did in Washington state. So you got to do a lot of personal research in terms of what's applicable to your individual scenario. But let's say you actually want to start an LLC for your game studio and you live in the United States. Now, I've previously used a service called LegalZoom, basically handles all the paperwork for actually submitting a company or registering a company in the United States. So it makes it super simple. I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I have used them previously. You do have to pay for it for, you know, depending on the level of service that you actually want. So for the sake of this video, let's say I'm going to use LegalZoom. So I'll go into LegalZoom. I'll check if my business name is available, what state I'm in, the industry, and then I'll select a plan based on what I actually want to do. You can also optionally look into copyright and trademark protection for your brand. I don't think that's super needed at the beginning, but there are services that can help you do that too, so if you just want to get that out of the way. Okay, so now assume that I have Big Mana registered as an LLC in New York, and specifically a single member LLC, again, because I just have the most familiarity with that, but you can structure it how you like. Now, next, in my mind at least, is developing the legitimacy of an actual game studio. Now, this varies based on what your ultimate goal is, so like looking for investors, you're definitely going to want to feel and look like a legit game studio. Now, to help establish ourselves as a legit game studio, obviously, besides, finishing and releasing a game, would be a professional website. So I'll go to a domain name provider, I like NameCheap, and look for a nice domain for Big Mana. Now, bigmana.com is taken, but since we are a game studio, I'd recommend either bigmana.gg or bigmana.io or something. So I'll go with bigmana.gg. So now that we actually have the domain name, we need a website to match. Now, you can use website builders to quickly set up like a decent site, but they do cost money. I've tried Squarespace, Wix, and Webflow. Webflow is definitely the most expensive, but also kind of has like the best aesthetics. It also gets super complex. You can go super deep into Webflow. For our simple sake of just having sort of a landing page for our game studio, we probably don't need to go that deep. So for like a simple one-page site, I've actually recently discovered a service called bolt.new. You can use it up to a certain point for free, and it basically just generates like a full stack web app for you. Honestly, we don't need much of a back end. We really just need a front end landing page. So we can just use that to roughly create, a basic foundation of what we want. And then we can actually download the project files, edit it how we like, and then deploy it actually for free on services like Vercel or Netlify. And again, this is just a static site. If you need like a more complex backend, then you're going to need to host the backend somewhere, which you'll have to pay for. And then eventually, if you need to scale up on Vercel or Netlify, then it can get a lot more complex. But for like a literal one-page landing site, you can pretty much do this all for free. The only thing that really costs money is the domain name. And I actually did this for the website for my game Castlemancer. I was originally using a Wix site, but I was tired of paying the $20 per month for just like a static site. So I used bolt.new to get like 70% of the site infrastructure. I then just downloaded the project, made some edits myself, and then deployed it for free on Netlify. Now, the next thing to do for our legitimacy pillar for our game studio is to establish our social channels. I feel like this is a pretty standard step for any company you'd want to create, but it actually takes a while to establish an audience, so you want to do it sooner rather than later. It also helps you rank on Google, so if you have all of these social channels for your actual game studio name, then if I type in that name, given it's not like just some standard word, then I'll actually have like a bunch of things actually pop up. So when someone's like, is this an actual game studio? You'll see like, hey, we have all of our social channels, we're posting content, we have our website, here's the game's progress, here's our Steam page, everything will just kind of get populated. So I'd recommend creating basically every social media, because why not? So like YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and then obviously put your studio name under the developer and or publisher title on the Steam page for your actual game. And as you're developing your game, you can use these channels to slowly start to build buzz about your game. Now, I'm not gonna lie, as someone who does social media, it's a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time to get almost no traction. And that's why a lot of companies hire like a very specific social media person to manage like all of the different channels. So I just want to be upfront. It's not really a super easy, quick win or anything. Definitely takes a lot of time, but it is definitely worth it so that you can start building up news and buzz and potentially get articles written about you or other content creators reacting to your trailers or early demo footage. Okay, so to recap so far, we have a registered business, we have a domain name, we have a website, and we also have some sort of social media channels. Now, the next thing I want to focus on is actual finances. Again, I'm not an accountant, but you should at least start to track what you're spending your money on. So in the context of your business, if you're tracking your expenses, you're actually able to offset some of your taxes, at least in the US. So you've probably heard this as a tax write-off. Now, it's not like free money or anything, but it's basically lowering your tax responsibility. Again, up to a certain point. I'm not an accountant, but this is generally how I understand it. Now, let's say for my company and developing my game, I need a new laptop to run in Unity, for example. Now let's say this laptop is $2,000 and my game makes $50,000. So the income for my business would be $50,000, but I spent $2,000 on this new laptop to build and maintain the game. So then I can subtract that $2,000 from the $50,000 to lower my tax threshold to $48,000. So I'd be paying tax on the $48,000 instead of on the $50,000. So this is sort of a simple example, and it varies a lot based on your country and state, but it's still very important to track all of your expenses, know where your money's going, and potentially take advantage of different tax benefits for your actual business. In addition to tracking your expenses, you can then calculate your monthly burn rate, and then how much money you'd actually need to make from your game to then break even. So let's say for Big Mana, I'm working full-time on my game and game studio and using my savings to fund everything. Now let's say if I burn $5,000 per month, both on development and just living, so including things like rent and food, that would be like $60,000 per year. So if it takes 2 years to release the game, to break even, I'd need to make $120,000 off the game. Now, if you don't include living expenses, it would obviously be lower, but assuming I'm fully relying on this and the game studio is my full-time job. Now, since we have a registered business, we can also look into getting a business credit card or a business bank account. Now, these generally have more business-focused benefits and potentially higher credit limits. What this also helps prevent is what's called piercing the corporate veil. Now, remember when I said one of the benefits of having an LLC is having that barrier, that liability barrier between your personal assets and your company assets. Now, let's say you just have a personal bank account and everything your game studio is making is going just into your personal bank account. Now, it could be argued in court, like if you were getting sued in that previous example, that you're actually mixing your personal assets with the company's assets. And this is what's called piercing the corporate veil. So in that instance, you're at risk of losing that corporate or that limited liability protection, which could then make your personal assets at risk again. Now, it obviously varies on a case-by-case basis, but you want to keep those assets separate as much as you can. So what you could do is just have a simple business bank account, and then as all of that money from your game studio goes into that account, you can then transfer it to your personal checking account, for example. This also helps for keeping track of specific business expenses because then you don't have to look through your personal bank statements and just look at what's going in and what's going out from that business bank account. Now, for example, when I had an LLC, I used something called Bluevine. It was very simple to set up, not affiliated with them at all. I just looked up like easy business checking accounts to set up. Super simple. So there's a lot of those things out there, but again, it varies based on your country and your state. Okay, so now we're tracking expenses on a month-to-month basis, and we have a rough idea of our burn rate. The next thing I would do for Big Mana is look at potentially expanding our financing options. So that could come through a couple different methods. One, I could try to crowdsource funds from places like Kickstarter. Two, I could look for a gaming-centric venture capital firm to provide investment or even a game publisher. Or I could finance by taking out like a small business loan from a bank. So for Big Mana, I'm feeling the more like venture capital route. So I'll quickly put together a pitch deck both for the studio and for the actual game. Now for this example, I'm going to use my game Castlemancer to pitch, but you should actually go wishlist Castlemancer on Steam. Now we've done a lot of the tangible stuff for a game studio. We have a business, a website, social channels, a business checking account. We're tracking finances. We have a pitch deck for expanding our financing options. Now, the last major step, besides obviously finishing your game, would be to actually start networking within the game dev community. Now, depending on how much money you have or how much money you want to spend, you can look into getting actual booths at gaming conventions like GDC or PAX, or simply just walk around and try to strike up conversations with other indie game developers. So I actually did this in a video I did a few years ago where I interviewed game devs at PAX West. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of game devs I was talking to asked for a business card. Now I'm from the big tech world, so no one used a business card, but apparently that's pretty common at these conventions, so I recommend getting a business card. So for Big Mana, let's create some business cards. There's a bunch of software to do this. I like Canva, so let's just whip something up in that. Sweet. So to recap, we have an established business entity. We purchased a domain and created a website. We created social media channels. channels. We set up a business bank account. We started tracking our finances. We created materials for financing, and we made business cards and started to network within the actual game dev community. Now, I think those are really solid steps for establishing like a legitimate game studio. Again, as you hire employees or contractors, the legality and the financing and the business will obviously get more complex, so definitely do your research into that side of it. Now, making a game studio can be really overwhelming, but that's where this video's sponsor Skillshare can help. If you're starting your own game studio, there's going to be a lot to do, so individual productivity can become really important, which is why I was going through Ali Abdal's productivity courses over on Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across important areas for starting a game studio like design, marketing, sales, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, or side hustles to the next level. This month, Skillshare is focusing on the theme of cultivating a daily art habit, because real progress happens one small step at a time. And really, this is about building that creative momentum. It may seem obvious, but starting a game studio absolutely requires creativity. Both creativity in actually building a game, but also how you run the business and market it. And with all the stuff to do, it can feel overwhelming on where to start, but it's just one step at a time. That's what Skillshare is here for. It's all about making the choices to learn, grow, and nurture a creative practice. Flex into new skills on Skillshare and grow in all the ways you've wanted to. And you can practice that creativity over on Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so get started today. And thank you to Skillshare for supporting the channel. So let me know what you think of the video. Let me know if I've missed any steps if you've done this before. This is sort of just what I would do, how I would think about it. I established a single member LLC when I was living in Washington, so that's kind of how I thought about things, but let me know. Wishlist Castlemancer over on Steam if you're into roguelike deck builders. My name is Michael. We do a bad British accent at the end of every video. That's all from me, and hopefully I see you in another one. Bye-bye.